I'd just like to begin by expressing my sadness at the passing of Dietrich Mateschitz, who's been very ill for the last few months. Ran Red Bull, created Red Bull, and put everything he had really into motor racing. I've never known of anybody like Dietrich to have been a self-made billionaire as he was, a brilliant person obviously, who remained so much behind the scenes and put so much into not just motorsport, got to say, historic aircraft, X Games, the whole thing. But he loved it all and was never up front and center, always backstage, and just put everything into it. And there are several conversations I've had over the years with various people saying, do you think that if this was a company run the normal corporate way with a massive board making decisions, do you think they would invest so much money in motorsport and these other activities? And usually the answer was, well, no, of course not. This is just one guy's passion. And that's what always impressed me about Dietrich Mateschitz. He just went for it and did his own thing. And I don't think we'll ever see anybody like him. And sympathy, condolences to all the teams and people with whom he worked and supported, and of course to his family and friends. But I think he's a case study in not being up front and center and being behind the scenes and just doing everything in the right way. And we'll miss him, absolutely, for sure. I'll miss him. To my deep regret, I didn't know him very well, met him once or twice. But I guess that says everything. He was a difficult person for people, the likes of me, on the outside of motor racing, to get to know, unlike a lot of others who, as I say, are up front and center stage. But Dietrich wasn't, and that was his charm as well as his brilliance, I think. Of course, Dietrich lived to see Max clinch his second world championship, but not to see qualifying today. Max finished third, as it happened. A bit of a surprise, although based on what we saw yesterday and the speed of, I was going on yesterday about Charles Leclerc and how quick he was out of the box when he got into the car in FP2. And to Carlos Sainz's credit, he'd been just putting in a lot of homework all weekend, particularly on Friday, when obviously Robert Schwartzman was in the car in the first session and he had to carry the team on his shoulders and get the car set up and then put in a good long run, as we said yesterday. And then this morning again, he was the only guy on medium tyres for the entire session well, not right at the end, he's on soft tyres at the end, but medium at the beginning, doing a setup run and then doing a good long run on medium tyres with fuel in the car. And very quick he was too. The only other driver out there doing a long run this morning was Max Verstappen, who, unlike Max, didn't do anything on Friday because he was trying to get the front end of the car sorted. And let's just have a look at that right now, because it's an interesting comparison. It was the only two drivers this morning because everyone was getting ready for qualifying because of the time effectively they'd spent on the Pirelli tyre testing yesterday. And you see that Max was on the soft tyre, 41.9, 42.5. He's doing 42s and ends up in the 43s. The tyres are going off quite quickly. And Carlos Sainz on the medium, look how impressive that run was on Saturday morning in FP3. 42.5, 42.2, 42.6, 43.0, and ending with a 42.9. And you can see there, after qualifying, the feeling was, as ever, that Red Bull still had the top speed, which we'll talk about in a second going into qualifying. But look how close they are in top speed with fuel in the car. You've got Max doing 289, 294, and then you've got Carlos Sainz 289, 290. Okay, the slight advantage still with Max, but nothing like the same advantage that we saw in qualifying. So let's have a look now at what happened in qualifying. It all came down, as ever, to, well, I've got to say here, Charles Leclerc not only did not run the car in FP1 yesterday, that was the Robert Schwartzman session, but also he's got, the news came through today, he's got a 10-place grid penalty. I mean, it just goes on and on for Charles Leclerc, doesn't it? You can probably trace this one right back to, I don't know, what, the Spanish Grand Prix when he's leading by 12 seconds, the turbo went, and of course that puts them out of sync with all their engines. But everybody, there were a couple of others as well, have had to change internal combustion engines. Fernando Alonso, Guanyu Zhou, and Sergio Perez all have got 5-place grid penalties, but Charles got a 10-place grid penalty because it's not only the internal combustion engine, but also a turbo, and that's 5 plus 5 minus 10. So he's starting from, P12 on the grid now. But having said that, it was Charles Leclerc looking really good, as ever, putting in a brilliant lap. So let's have a look at the comparison now of those Q3 laps. Carlos Sainz got the pole with a 34.356. Charles Leclerc 34.421. And that happened because Carlos was quicker by a tenth in sector 2, which is the run down to the hairpin. It's the end of the S's, the run down to the hairpin, and of course the straight. They're both identical top speeds on the straight, 320. But more importantly, I think he had the tyres exactly right for sector 3, and that seemed to be the pattern of the day. If you could get a good sector 1 and sector 2 together, but still have enough in the tyres in sector 3, because they were right on the edge, they're all on new sets of softs, then you've got your lap. So that 30.7 in sector 3 effectively is what did the job for Carlos. Superb job for Carlos Sainz on a windy, gusty day when the cars were not easy to drive. These cars are pretty sensitive to crosswinds, and we've talked a lot about Carlos Sainz's native skill, his ability just to hold a slide, his reflexes, his balance. And around here, he just looked absolutely in the groove. And I wonder whether or not a lot of that was based on the amount of running he did, his consistent running he did with fuel in the car on medium tyres, and whether this is a new pattern that Carlos Sainz should adopt, rather than going out for these quick laps and then coming up against a few barriers when he's right on the edge on soft tyres, just to get Carlos in these rhythms where he's on this medium tyre, putting in fuel runs, is a great way for him then to get in the car, get the fuel out. There's nothing nicer then than to feel the grip of the soft tyre with a light car. And that's exactly what Carlos felt, I'm sure, on that final Q3 lap. Really, really good job. Max Verstappen had the understeer drama yesterday. They seem to have solved that. So Max doing that 34.4 in the last run of Q3, Red Bull changed their strategy somewhat by sending him out early and allowing him to do 2 warm-up laps to get the temperature in the tyres through a different cycle, just to see whether or not they could get the tyres to last the lap, because that was the problem for Red Bull. Call it too much grip, too much downforce. With the amount of wing they were running, they could afford to give away some top speed. And the grip they had through sector 1 was in effect destroying the tyres in sector 3. So what Max tried in the second run of Q3 was to do 2 warm-up laps, 2 very slow warm-up laps. Everybody else just did the 1 warm-up lap. And it seemed to work pretty well. 25.5 in sector 1. That's a Ferrari sector 1 time. So that's really quick, because there's nobody quicker around sector 1 all day than the Ferraris. So he's right there. Then he does his 37.8 in sector 2, because he's got that massive top speed advantage, 326 to 320. That's 6 kilometers an hour over approximately 10 seconds. But then in sector 3, for whatever reason, the way he's warmed up the tyres, or because the Red Bull is just using that soft tyre too hard, bearing in mind how quick Max was in sector 1, a 31.0. And that's where he lost what potentially could have been pole position for him. So that went away. He's obviously not that worried because he's still on the front row, albeit on the dirty side of the grid. And Charles Leclerc, of course, with that penalty. Sergio Perez qualified P4th, but he's also got a penalty as well, a 5-place grid penalty in his case. So he'll be starting P9. You can see they're slightly slower in sector 1, and then look how much quicker he was in sector 3, 30.8. So that's where Sergio Perez got his lap from, to be that close to Max Verstappen, as it happened, because he hadn't been that close all day. And he did that by not being as quick in sectors 1 and 2, in effect, effectively sector 1. And again, 3.23 in a straight line. I mean, the significant advantage of Red Bull in a straight line on light fuel is amazing. But as I say, if you look at the way they compare with fuel in the car, the difference isn't that great, or wasn't that great this morning when we saw Max and Sainz in comparison, albeit on different tyre compounds. So early in the race, if Carlos Sainz gets the lead, there's half a chance he's just not going to get blown away. Halfway through the race, it might be a different story. On light fuel, it looks as if the Red Bull is going to have a little bit more top speed with which to play. But if Carlos makes a good start, it could be a win for him tomorrow. Lewis Hamilton looked pretty good all day, looked really good yesterday. He was on a very weird lap today, and he was incredibly quick through sector 1 at the time of FP3 this morning, and then had a weird moment in the hairpin where he just sort of understeered and then kept going on the lap, and then had a couple of incredible slides and moments, and then backed out of the lap finally. It just looked like a really odd lap for Lewis, but nonetheless, he was there was a lot of pressure on Lewis because he was actually slower than George Russell when qualifying began, having been quicker all weekend. So pressure again on Lewis Hamilton, not only that he hasn't got a race-winning car yet, but also George there, not in his mirrors. George alongside him, actually slightly in front of him going into qualifying. But he put that lap together in the first run in Q3 and didn't do a quicker lap in the second run in Q3. So that needs to be borne into account. When he did that time, 34.9, well, you could say he just didn't do a great lap in the second part of Q3, I guess is what it comes down to. 34.9, just quicker than George Russell in the end, who did go quicker in the last few seconds of Q3. And you see there, Lewis slightly quicker, sector 2, that's the back end of the S's, but slower in sector 3, so very, very close between the two Mercedes drivers, both 318, and that I think is the most significant number there, top speed of 318 kilometers an hour. Again, if you multiply that over an 11-second period, you're looking at 8 kilometers over, 11 seconds, 10 seconds. That's a lot of difference between the Mercedes and the Red Bull. So when you read or hear about the Mercedes drivers, again, complaining about their top speed, you can see what that is actually all about. So let's just have a look at these top speeds once and for all. This was at the end of FP3, and obviously they run a bit more power in qualifying, but they're still relative and therefore still relatively meaningful. You can see there Red Bull topping the speed trap on the main straight, 326 for both of them. Then no surprise really to see Williams, which don't have a lot of downforce and therefore have not as much drag as many of their opposition in the midfield. So they're very near the Red Bulls in terms of top speed, but it doesn't really help them. There's a big battle, of course, between Alpine and McLaren. Fernando Alonso 319. I didn't actually have one there for Esteban Ocon. But Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris 315, 313. So the Alpine definitely quicker in a straight line around Austin. But what a job Lando Norris did in Q3 actually to out-qualify Fernando Alonso, who'd been quicker throughout Q1 and Q2 and looked quicker all weekend. And yet Lando Norris dragged that McLaren around. Well, he didn't drag it. It was a beautiful lap. It was a beautifully put together lap. Classic Lando Norris. Lots of subtle, soft inputs and earlier corners than we were seeing at this time last year as well. He's really starting to improve in that area. And great lap, 35.6 from Lando to be P8 and Fernando Alonso eventually qualifying P9. That's not taking into account any of the penalties. So a really good lap. Beaten both of them though by Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin, who did a good job. I was saying yesterday he did a really good job both with light fuel and he did a good long run as well. It looks like getting these long runs in, which a lot of drivers don't tend to do because they spend a lot of time setting the car up, getting the lap absolutely right. But it was kind of force majeure in Austin because of the tyre testing in FP2, the 90-minute extended FP2 tyre testing. So everybody knew that it was going to be quite important to get a lot of running in FP1, and that's what Aston Martin did very well, I think, with Lance Stroll. And again, you get the fuel out of the car, you put the soft tyres on, and all of a sudden the car feels really good. And Lance Stroll, 35.5, I think that was a really good lap. And nobody's confirming this for sure, but I suspect Rob Wilson's had quite a lot to do recently with Lance Stroll as well. So big, if that is the case, and I don't want to suggest that it is 100%, good job by Rob Wilson, I think, on that one. And Valtteri Bottas, another Rob Wilson driver, got to say, P10, really good job for him. He was there or thereabouts, back end of Q1, it looked slightly dodgy. He didn't really go any quicker, and just made it through. But then did a really good job, and to get through to Q3 in the Alpha, excellent job, I thought. So yeah, I think the only note to end on, again, is to reiterate the impact that Dietrich Mateschitz of Red Bull, who passed away today, has had on motorsport. And the longevity of his involvement in Formula One is almost unprecedented as well. It goes back to 94, around there. I mean, this is incredible for one man to have been so committed to Formula One and putting his money where his mouth was and getting on with it, and actually not saying very much as well, just letting other people get on with it and do the job they have. And as I say, I'm not sure we'll see the like of Dietrich Mateschitz ever again in Formula One. See you tomorrow with our regular video. Take care.